And folks on both sides of the Atlantic, on Substack and on YouTube and other venues, we are live. We've got me here sitting in the No Delusion Zone studios and my partner, Jonathan Fink, who is wandering around the back alleys of London looking for a safe location on which to transmit. We are all hoping that he finds it very soon. And gets into
this is the mean streets. I'm here.
Jonathan is our man on the
street. I'm here
in
my stab vest. I've got my spray here, ready to spray people's faces. I've got my stab vest on. You know, very dodgy place, London. If you believe Fox News, that is.
Folks, just bear with me a moment here. For some reason, Substack doesn't like me to broadcast live for some reason. The settings are perfect. It's the way it should be, but it doesn't like it. So for you folks that are trying to watch me on my Substack site, I don't know what's going on. So I don't know what's going on. I really don't. We shall see. It says that it's not going through. So I may bag it, to be honest, with Substack. This is, I think, the third or fourth week in a row that they've refused to accept the correct settings. YouTube, whom I hate with a passion, seems to accept it. So I'm really sorry for my Substack subscribers, but complain to Substack, not me. They don't want to do it. So I don't get it. In any event, the hell with them. The whole point of today's live stream is what I'm calling the America's national security tragedy. It's that blasphemous, disgusting report that was put out a couple of weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago now, a week and a half, that described America's withdrawal from the world, essentially.
It's last Friday, in fact. So it's just under a week, but it feels like a lifetime, right?
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
It's the new blown partnership with the Kremlin. I mean, Trump made it very, very clear that if there was any doubt that he was a Kremlin or a Russian apparatchik, an asset, he cleared that right up because he pretty much, he said that he's dooming Europe to the dustbin of history, that they're losers, that they're in existential danger of civilization collapse, in his demented words, and that he's going to cozy up even more to Putin. It was just disgusting. I mean, it made me even more enraged and embarrassed to be an American than I have already been since January 20th, when this loathsome creature took office. Jonathan, what's been the reaction in England? I kind of know it, but from a Brit, what's been going on there?
Many of the headlines and commentators use the word shock, but of course, if you've been paying attention, not that much of it is a shock. The shock to me is that there's so little pushback in the US against it, so little pushback. I mean, this rewiring of the entire world order should, in my view, prompt America's version of Maidan. It really should, because just as Yanukovych said, look, I know you all voted to be part of the European Union, and everyone's building their aspirations on that, rule of law and all the rest of it, but yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to be friends with Moscow. That prompted a revolution. What we're looking at here, the Trump revolution, the rewiring of not just American foreign policy, but the world global order, he's rewiring it in favor of oligarchs and autocrats and kleptocrats. It's absolutely clear what's going on here, and not just Putin. This document makes no mention of China being a threat, makes no mention of North Korea being a threat, it makes no mention of Russia being a threat. That means it is utterly, utterly different from every other national security document produced by the US pretty much in the 20th century or in the post-war period, where this became part of the core part of institution building and trying to bring let's say law, trade, wealth, and order to the world. This completely unravels all of that in favor, not in a neutral way, not in an isolationist way, because this is absolutely not an isolationist charter. This is a charter for regime change, for meddling in favor of autocrats, in favor of extreme right-wing and fascist parties, and in favor of America's traditional enemies. This ought to have prompted, quite frankly, a revolution pushback. It's the silence which with this is being met. Okay, there's little squeals of outrage and whatever, but that's the scary part for me.
I agree with you. Look, I understand the elected officials' reluctance to openly criticize America, to openly criticize Donald Trump and Washington at any time. They are still overly dependent on America for many, many different things, both financially and militarily. I get that. But there comes a point, Jonathan, where it's so obvious and it's so dangerous to not accept the fact that Donald Trump can't be trusted. That's a fact. But the American government now can't be trusted under Donald Trump. That, in fact, I hate to say this, America is now an adversary of Europe. They need to accept that and most importantly, in my opinion, publicly announce that. Get off the fence and just announce it and then back that up with the actions that they need to do to separate out from America. Because I guarantee you, Trump's not going to back down. This is only going to get worse for Europe.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, they have declared this. This is a declaration. And of course, the scary bit is it's not just Trump. There is a whole bunch of Project 2025 guys. There's the apparent author of this was not Stephen Miller or Trump. I mean, Trump most likely couldn't string a sentence together. Never mind an auto pen. I doubt whether he can actually hold a pen. But there are a number of figures who see this as a viable thing. This isn't just the ravings of Trump. There are a number of right-wing ideologues working to the benefit of oligarchs, and those oligarchs themselves are working to the benefit of autocracies and autocrats because they see their enrichment as part of that. They see the European Union as the last bastion of a rules-based order, the last delusional set of people on this earth that believe that if you create rules, you should abide by them, that believe that freedom of speech is not absolute, but it comes with responsibilities, and you need to put frames around that. And the EU, which you need to regulate oligarchs, you need to regulate tech oligarchs and the tech fascists. You put limits on them. This very much, I think, is being driven by the tech oligarchs because they do not want any kind of limitations whatsoever placed on them. But of course, it is also working to the favor of Vladimir Putin. This is his quite literal Christmas wish list and wet dream all rolled into one.
Absolutely. Look, this is all driven by money, by greed. It's a grift. The techno oligarchs are behind this, and Trump doesn't know anything but deals. And I hate that word because of him. But this is just a real estate and a business deal to him. He doesn't know nor care about democracy, human rights, civil rights, rule of law of any kind. He doesn't care. But having said that, the fact that it's all driven by greed and money, like mob rule from a mob don, D-O-N, this is being orchestrated, as you said, from the Kremlin. These stupid, bastardly tech oligarchs are playing out Russia's work. They are doing what the Kremlin wants. They are working to dismantle American democracy and European democracy, which, by the way, they're doing a very good job. The extremist right in Europe, as you know, is making many, many more big inroads in many countries in Europe. This is all the work of the Kremlin. And so the tech oligarchs, the ultra billionaires in America are doing the work of the Kremlin, all to line their pockets. It's financially based. It's not ideologically based, but it is an ideology based on what the Kremlin wants. And you're right. This is a incredible Christmas gift, or in Russia, a New Year's gift for Putin and a wet dream all into one. And he's almost not having to lift a finger. It's really, really disgusting.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? And in this context, you know, the tremendous loss of life in Ukraine doesn't seem maybe such a high price for him to pay. I mean, it wasn't anyway, because he doesn't care about human life. But for him, I'm not sure it's that important taking all of Ukraine. What he thinks he's doing is putting pressure on the international order through the invasion, whether it takes territory or not, in a way that is unraveling the international order. So for him, it's a point of leverage and coercion. We're still focused on the war as the thing in itself. And I'm afraid to say we've missed the big picture. Well, you and I haven't necessarily missed the big picture, but most people, including analysts, have missed the big play that is going on.
Oh, I agree. And that's because I'm not going to say it's because they're stupid. Not at all. I'll just talk for America right now. The leaders of MAGA, the Marco Rubios and the Stephen Millers and the J.D. Vances, well, at least J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, these are Ivy League educated attorneys. They know exactly what's going on. And just before Trump took office, at least the first time, they hated Donald Trump. They were against everything he was for. They hated Russia. They were staunch anti-Soviets back in the day and anti-Russians after that. They were very much pro-democracy. But they've all been cowed. They've all been taken in by the cult of greed. And now they are all bootlickers, traitors to the United States, certainly, and to Western democracy. They don't even ask about jumping when he says jump. It's how high. They will do anything he wants. The entire Republican Congress, they control the Congress, the Republicans, are just part of a cult. It's disgusting to see the turnabout, Jonathan, in the last, I'll say 10 months. They were before that too, but especially since January 20th. Many of them have gone from anti-Russian, pro-democracy to, boy, isn't Putin such a misunderstood good guy? And what a savior and saint Donald Trump is. And democracy, maybe it's not the best thing, and we need to rethink everything. I don't even know how to describe that anymore.
I mean, this, of course, is driven by some of the tech oligarchs who, you know, up to a couple of decades ago started forming an idea that democracy gets in the way. It gets in the way of moving fast and breaking things and building their tech empires. I wanted to ask you as well, because it seemed to me from the very inauguration speech of Biden, is the term that just ended. From the very day, it just seemed to be, I was hoping that he would come in and say, right, things are fundamentally broken. We're going to fix things. We're going to reinforce democratic process. We are going to pursue wrongdoers. We're going to empower rule of law and fortify our democracy against the obvious threats. The threats are obvious to you and I back then when Biden came in. And yet his speech was so gentle and soft and normalizing everything that's going on, as if we've just reverted back to, normalcy is resumed. Don't worry, folks. And when you look back at it, almost nothing was done to reinforce US democracy against the exact digital and electoral and executive coup we're now seeing unfold.
Well, let me address one. By the way, I just want to say, please, those of you that are watching this live stream, please ask some questions. Post questions. We want questions. We want you to not necessarily agree with us. Certainly, if you disagree, that's fine. But say why. Back it up with some facts if you have them. But certainly post some questions. And I just want to address very quickly, Jonathan, one of the commenters, because apparently people don't listen too much. They come in with preconceived notions and they just blather them out. I was asked why I'm not talking about America pushback against what's going on, why I'm just blaming Europe. Obviously, that person has something in their ears, because I've just stated how the Republican-led Congress is full of shit. Can't make it any clearer than that. And how Trump and all his MAGA Republicans are traitors. So obviously, you're not going to get any pushback from the United States because they've turned into Putin lovers. So for the person that stated that, why don't you just go away? Because apparently you're not listening. And I'm not sorry to say that. If we get one less person who doesn't listen, maybe we'll get somebody who does. No, America's not going to push back because the American government, not the American people, at least 50% of us are in the tank with Russia right now. They don't like democracy. They never did. So they're all in right now for Russia. And you're right. Trump and MAGA, the Republicans, came into power saying, wasn't their famous expression, Jonathan, we're going to drain the swamp, the deep state, all that nonsense. Well, they are the alligators now in the swamp, and they are the deep state. They are more corrupt. I'm talking about the current Republican leadership in this country, the United States. They are more corrupt and anti-democratic than any government that has ever existed in the 2.5 centuries of this constitutional republic. And that is an easily verifiable fact.
And they're doing it in public. They're doing it in plain sight with no sense whatsoever of shame or that they'll be held to account. The other aspect of this national security policy interests me because, as I've said, the Russian power vertical has humiliation absolutely at its core. And of course, again, many analysts have focused on the detail and what the implications might be. We'll come to that in a minute. But there's a deep strain in this document of wanting to humiliate and abuse allies. It runs through it like a kind of stick of rock. And not many of people have picked up on that, but this is absolutely aligned with the way the power vertical operates in Russia.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been said by a lot smarter people than me, but this could have, and possibly part of it was written by the Kremlin. I mean, this was very similar to the disgusting document that was that alleged peace treaty with the 28 points released recently, which was, we learned, written by the Kremlin. At least a large part of it was. Well, this rag, this national security tragedy, if it wasn't, could have been written by the Kremlin. You're right. They are using humiliating terms. And I even said that in a recent podcast, an article. It's an adolescent rant, again, which Trump is famous for, and MAGA. If they don't have facts, they tend to retreat into adolescent taunts or insults, things you'd hear from a 6 or an 8-year-old. And that's what they're doing. They're making fun of Europe. They're criticizing them. They're dehumanizing them. They're trying to take away any respect that they had. And by the way, they did none of that for Russia or even China. But Russia certainly wasn't named as an adversary and wasn't named on having any deficits, anything negative at all. Putin wasn't mentioned. So obviously, again, the United States government under the Republicans are in the tank with Putin and the Kremlin, and they're very much against Europe. Immigration was a big thing in this national security tragedy. The fact that Trump and the Republicans are very much against any non-white Christians moving into Europe. He called them existential. They are existential. What is it? Decivilizing, or you probably know the term better than I do. Essentially, they were at risk of going extinct. Europe, because they're allowing
civilizational erasure, he called it.
There civilization erasure, meaning that the too many non-white, non-Christians are moving into Europe. Therefore, they are going to erase the historic European culture. I have to say real quick, Jonathan, there's points of that are one point I actually agree with, believe it or not. And that is, I've always believed in assimilation of any immigrants. I believe that if immigrants do not at least attempt to honestly assimilate into any nation, any culture for which they move and want to be a part of, a citizen of, they need to assimilate. They cannot expect to have the country where they want to be a citizen assimilate to them. We have had huge problems with that in the United States. I know you're having it right now in the UK. It's happening right now on the continent, in Europe. And so for that point, I agree that whoever moves from wherever in the world to Europe, they need to assimilate. And that's been a big point of friction in any immigration. But that's really not what Trump's all about. He doesn't want any non-whites, any non-Christians moving to America or to Europe. And that was a big point of the national security tragedy. And that didn't even belong in there.
No. And of course, it's always framed in an extreme racist way, an extreme fascist way. Whereas I'm with you, assimilation, I think, is incredibly important for societal resilience. It's incredibly important for economic strength as well, because unless you properly assimilate, people aren't going to become good citizens and economically productive and part of their communities. But it's not a black, white, brown issue. When people assimilate, and I know this, I traveled in on the train today, and there are a lot of people there who are not what Steve Bannon would describe as the traditional inhabitants, although obviously Britain is an extraordinary mixture of people anyway, and it always has been over the last couple of millennia. But I looked around and I just thought, is there friction here? Are there people loathing each other? Are there people hating each other? No, I saw students interacting, every possible color under the sun, talking English. Some obviously not their native tongue, many it is. And I'm just looking around going, there isn't that groundswell of hate and division and loathing that they talk about. There isn't the rivers of blood to, quote a famous speech of a, racist conservative politician here. We don't have that level of friction. Now, that's not to say that we can't work better on, as you say, assimilation. We can't work better, which actually we can, on our own sense of cohesion and identity. Because I think there are many white English people who know precious little about their own culture, and could do a lot more to build that resilience and cohesion. It's not a white, black, brown problem. It's a societal problem when overall, we're not working on our identity, we're not exploring our history, and forgetting it. It's not a racial issue. But that's exactly how they want to position it. Why? Because there's electoral advantage in that, because it's simplistic, because it plays, as you say, to an extremely childish, one-dimensional view of how civilizations and societies work. And anyone who studied, say, the Roman Empire will realize that, yeah, they didn't operate on these racial lines. They operated at an extraordinary hierarchy. You had to earn your freedom. You had to earn your way up in society. But once you'd attained that citizenship, it really wasn't being about, white, black, brown, etc. And are we saying, Roman civilization wasn't, one of the apexes of historic civilization? I mean, what they come out with is a nonsense. It's a pure nonsense, and it's entirely self-serving. But unfortunately, we're not fighting it nearly hard enough.
Well, one of the reasons that I think it's obvious that this document, this national security tragedy, was at least ideologically driven by the Kremlin, if not written by the Kremlin, is because it uses one of their hallmark plays, which is to sow chaos, not necessarily to tell a country what to do, but to tell them many things to do. So they fight among themselves. And in this document, they didn't just attack
division, distrust, all these things.
All these things. They didn't just attack immigration. They didn't just attack Europe's politicians or the left-wing radicals. They went at it from all different angles, like they're doing here in America. As you know, the MAGA Republicans are anti-science and anti-education. That's insane. We have become America because of our innovations, because of our universities, because of our scientific achievements, because of what we've given to the world in terms of medicine, in terms of engineering, and many, many, many other things. Well, they want to dismantle that. Trump now came out with a law. He tried an executive order to ban all green energy, specifically wind energy and solar energy. Again, this is insane. The rest of the world, especially China, is making great strides.
Who does it benefit? Who does? Yeah.
Well, no, that's what
it
I'm
benefits
saying.
China,
Nobody
who's
benefits
going all out on green.
Other
Well, Russia
Russia
benefits
is
because of
trying
Russia
to
produces
well, he's trying to
hydrocarbons.
destroy us from within. If he could destroy us from within, which is the Russia playbook, that's what he's trying. I mean, and there's many other things. It's just ludicrous. Trump isn't smart enough to come up with all of this. He's being told what to say by his lower apparatchiks. The Stephen Millers and the Marco Rubios and the J.D. Vances and the Bannons and on, who are Russian apparatchiks, and that's really dangerous.
Yeah, it is quite clearly, and we've talked about. I talked about this last year with you and with others. I talked about it with John Cipher and others, and that is the Russian strategy of divide and conquer. It is that there is a playbook of democratic deconstruction. How do you take apart democratic institutions? How do you mount a sort of internal coup, or let's say it's not regime change, is it? But there's a word I'm struggling to sort of find here. But essentially, it's a form of regime breakdown from the inside. We see it in Georgia play out over a number of years. Here it's going at breakneck speed. But if you were to try to imagine, let's say we go back in a time machine 10 years ago, and you say to someone, imagine if the Kremlin was to plant its agent in America with the express view of deconstructing American power, what would they do? And think in the most extreme possible terms. Well, this is exactly how they behave. And these are exactly the steps they would take. Line by line, point by point. It's a plan unfolding. And of course, we now have the outlines of where this leads. And it's not a particular surprise. I talked with Keir Giles about this earlier this week. The Russian playbook is divide and conquer, divide and conquer, divide and conquer, and then use the population of the territory that you've conquered to conquer the next patch of territory. Well, this is the plan unfolding. Deconstruct or destroy international institutions. NATO is next. We've been saying it for a while. NATO is already hollowed out. It is an imaginary organization, and those in it are not doing us a service by pretending it's still resilient and united. NATO is the next to go. I believe America will withdraw from that, and he'll probably get away with it. Maybe some more pushback there. But what they want to do is to create Europe, a Europe that is a mosaic of disunited countries, and then election by election interfere so that Kremlin-aligned regimes come in territory by territory. They will then up the ante. They may well conquer those territories without having to do a full-scale kinetic war. And when there are a few territories left that will not bow the knee to the Kremlin, they will use the territories they control to crush the rest. Why? Because Russia doesn't have a viable economy. It doesn't have a viable population. How is Russia going to survive civilizationally in their terms? By doing what it's always done and become a parasite on the peoples that are around it. That's how Moscow started, and this is the same playbook over 400 years. Take territory, suck the resources, destroy the culture of those populations, rewrite their histories so that they never had a history and were never a peoples, and then carry on to the next territory and the next and the next. It's the same playbook unfolding, but on an unimaginable scale.
What you're describing, and I'm sure you were alluding to this in some way, is the story of the Manchurian Candidate. What if they put a person in slipped him into an American government position? In that story, of course, it was the president. And I'll say, I've now said this for many weeks. I now believe formally that Donald Trump is a Russian asset. However you want to look at that. He is a Russian asset. No, he's not smart enough to have an ideology from the Kremlin. It doesn't matter. They've got something on him, or a lot on him, and they are telling him what to do. And he is letting it out in dribs and drabs. And in some days, he's anti-Kremlin. He's going to get really tough, which is all bullshit. And then other days, he is saying that Ukraine can't win. They're too small. They're too weak, which is what he's on now, and that Russia's too big and too powerful, and they're going to win. But he's a Russian asset. There's no ideology there, and Russia has been successful and putting their Manchurian, or in this case, their Moscovite candidate into America. Not just Trump. I'm convinced that they are behind in bankrolling many senior level politicians, specifically Republican officials in this country, because they can't just be that afraid of Trump and the MAGA base all by itself. It's impossible. So there's a lot going on here. Russia has planted these seeds for many years. It's right out of the playbook.
Decades, even, about.
Decades. Oh,
and they won't. They won't put all their eggs in one basket, as you say.
No.
They will have several figures. They will surround Trump with other figures who can remind him whose side he's on, and he can remind them. It's a mutual circle of fear and loathing. They will have many people who are aligned, many people who are going along with it because they believe they can line their pockets, and they will line their pockets. It was reliably told to me that, and I said this a few months back, even last year, that I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that Elon Musk has regular calls directly with Vladimir Putin. It is now my belief, and this is an opinion, not a fact, so don't sue, but that both Trump and potentially Musk and others have been directly groomed by Vladimir Putin to build the architecture that we're seeing here. I also kind of suspect very much that someone like Surkov is involved, because this scheme that's unfolding is simple, but it's far too clever.
Well, Musk's father is
for I would say Putin to figure it out. And yes, of course he does. Yes, he was at the Valdai event in there.
And I think that the ties go much further than that. And I won't get into the derogatory statement that I made about Musk falling not far from the tree. It was a little more graphic than that. But the fact is, I believe that his father is an apparatchik that is very close to Putin and the Kremlin. And I believe that his son, Elon, is as well. And he's the world's richest man. I mean, look at the damage that Doge did to our government. Literally taking his chainsaw to it. Compromat. They've got compromat on the Musks.
On Elon Musk's father, I'm sure they have.
Yes, and a number of Republican elected officials here. And I have to say this at this point: I'm disgusted every day that about 50% of the American people were stupid enough to re-elect Donald Trump this time, but that has all the fingerprints of Russia on it as well, because for many years, going back to before the 2016 election, they were interfering with the election, not just with big donors and money, but with the stupid American electorate and social media. It was uncovered immediately after the 2016 election that they were controlling the social media. They were making many of the pro-Kremlin comments on social media sites. They owned many of the social media sites, and they got Republican Trump voters all worked up about
it's worse than that. They pioneered, and they used it in Brexit as well. They pioneered a method that you don't have to spend an absolute enormous fortune to just sort of shotgun the field. No, you figure out specific demographics, you figure out grievances, you micro-target using extraordinary, technological reach and analysis. And they're still doing it. They're still doing it here to inject right-wing narratives in huge data sets that they've harvested. One of the supposed aims of Doge was not just to deconstruct, a bureaucratic architecture. It was to do a digital heist on America's personal data that was contained in the State Department or wherever it was stored, or the Treasury or whatever. And I don't know whether that was fully successful. I read articles that suggest it was partly successful. Now, who are they doing that? Where's that data ended up? I would be very surprised if it wasn't being used for large-scale micro-targeting by Russian-aligned entities and mafia groups and crypto groups operating on behalf of the Kremlin, because, of course, they do have, this isn't all just sort of KGB guys in a basement somewhere. They have a huge apparatus of outsourced resources companies, etc., that are loosely aligned with the Kremlin. You know, they turn a blind eye to their criminal activity, but when they need these guys, they'll call in the favors. So it's a form of, let's say, it's an alternative shadow economy. There's quite a bit of research into it, but of course, I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure a lot of the Doge data has ended up fueling these, which means this problem is not going to go away. These narratives are going to continue to be injected and micro-targeted to divide and destroy any cohesion that our societies might have had, with a singular purpose to soften us up so that when Russia is ready to strike, we don't know our left hand from our right, up from down, and we have no way of fighting back.
Well, one of the viewers here took some of my thunder, and he said the name of Cambridge Analytica, which was huge player in the American elections with their algorithms, and quite possibly some believe turned the election, gave it to the Republicans. And did they suffer? Not really. Like you just said, people turned a blind eye to this. Governments turned a blind eye to this, even though they're doing the work of the Kremlin and they are stealing elections. And no, it's not going to stop. There's been so many articles written recently in the States about the fact that even if Donald Trump were to leave the scene tomorrow, and I wish he would, it's not going to stop there. MAGA is going to be with us for a very, very long time. He has poisoned the system, whether it's through Doge or through Steve Bannon, or with Elon Musk or J.D. Vance, or any number of these people. They have drunk the Kool-Aid, and they have destroyed so much of the foundations of this country, of the government of this country, the foundational aspects of this country, that it may never recover, certainly in our lifetime, but it's going to take generations. So no, Trump leaving the scene is not going to happen. He's just a marionette. He is someone that is moving around and saying the words that other people smarter than him, which is almost anyone, is putting in his mouth. But the damage is long term, and that probably scares me more than almost anything else.
And of course, what we're seeing as well is a certain divide within the MAGA sphere. We've got Marjorie Taylor Greene, who suddenly seems to be almost making sense, raging against Trump. We've got Alex Jones saying he's done with Trump and his grift and the betrayal of the American people. Now obviously, I wouldn't necessarily ascribe real values to these people, but it does seem that that MAGA is becoming an entity that may not just outlive Trump, but it may divorce Trump and go on to have a life beyond. Yes. But again, this could well be part of the Moscow playbook, which is they don't want necessarily a strong Republican America. They want to keep the divide going and going and going.
Well, they would love a Republican / MAGA grip on America, but with their person as the head, as the figurehead, getting rid of Trump, who's a moron and makes mistakes. I'm sure he doesn't say and do all the things that the Kremlin would like, but you get a J.D. Vance in there. You get a Stephen.
He can't memorize the script, that's clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
He can't even memorize the script.
In there with half a brain. And MAGA retaining control and staying on the payroll of the Kremlin, you've got a long-term grip on the American government. And if you have a grip on the American government, you've got a grip on NATO and EU and Europe. It's all part of the same plan. And unfortunately, it's working far better than I can imagine that Putin ever dreamed of, and on the cheap. It makes somebody like me, ex-military, ex-intelligence person, just want to strangle somebody, because they're doing the work, counterintelligence work. They're doing all this destruction for almost no money at all. And the Americans and the far-right lunatics in Europe are just gleeful. They're just playing right into this. Apparently, they have amnesia. They don't remember the Soviet Union, or they don't care, or they're just too friggin' stupid and they're allowing Russia to make all these advances here in America and in Europe. It's quite frightening and disgusting.
And the AfD and their compliant supporters in Germany seem either not to remember how that society fell into tyranny in the 30s, and part of their program, which was published this week, aligns absolutely point by point by point with the US national security strategy, but it also adds some local flavor, which is the deconstruction of the Constitutional Court and all the guardrails that were designed to prevent Germany slipping into far right or far left autocracy ever again. They explicitly want to deconstruct all the norms that essentially prevented that from happening. And I think this is where people don't understand the absolute pernicious nature of Russia. Russia started World War II with Nazi Germany. They were co-protagonists in dividing Europe. And there are KGB agents who've defected. No, it cannot be said often enough. There are credible KGB agents who also claim to have seen evidence that Stalin's original plan was to have an alliance with the Nazis so that Germany and Western Europe would literally attrit each other to the point of absolute exhaustion so that he could charge in and mop up the pieces. Didn't quite work out immediately like that, as we know, but eventually it kind of almost did. We forget that Russia came in and took Central and Eastern Europe and then dominated it, brutalized it for decades thereafter. There is a precedent for all of this, and those people in Hungary who may have direct memory or familial memory of what it's like living under the Russians, the mind boggles that they should be surrendering in advance to that happening again.
Well, I guess the people in the Czech Republic have developed a large case of amnesia. Their new leader now is very pro-Kremlin and anti-Ukraine. So I guess, the Prague summer, Czechoslovakia under the Soviet Union, all the repression and the atrocities, I guess that's just part of fiction. It never really happened. It's fake news. And they're happy to have someone that's going to kiss the ass of a new czar. It makes me sick, Jonathan. I didn't grow up in Europe or in a former Soviet state. So I can't say I completely understand it, but I don't think you have to have lived there to know that that was a nightmare for those that did live there for almost 80 years. And now tens of millions of citizens in those countries are embracing with open arms the far-right extremists such as AfD, or what's going on in the Czech Republic and some others, actually many West European countries that are just happy to have leaders and political parties that embrace the Kremlin, that are almost hoping for a return of the Soviet Union. What the hell is going on with those people?
Yeah, I suspect they're not being clear and transparent with their people. I also expect that there are many, many analysts. I mean, they call it sane washing. Really, it's a form of normalization. There's some sane washing going on. We read this NSS, we see Trump's actions, we can read the statements of people that are closely aligned with his regime, and we can join the dots as we've been doing. We can also project forward to what that may well lead to in terms of a long-term strategy. And it terrifies us. But unfortunately, most people are not engaged in foreign policy. They do not vote in domestic elections based on foreign policy positions. They vote based on things that are right in front of their face. That's how most human beings operate, unfortunately. And their leaders, many analysts, are quite happy to I would say, support that, or they're in the same frame of not being able to see beyond that. And of course, at the moment, we have high prices for food, for energy, and all the rest. The direct cause of that, of course, is Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine. But our leaders have not explicitly joined the dots on that. Therefore, the people who are now pushing that line to essentially appease Russia, whether they express that explicitly or not, are using, you know, the prices and the social issues as a catalyst for that. And now they may well, in the short term, be able to improve people's lives by appeasing Russia and letting it once again get away with the extraordinary criminality that it's been getting away with. But the message here, you know, this time last week, what are we? We're Wednesday. This time last week, there was a Shaheed flying over the building where I was. I could hear the engine, the sort of whine and the lawnmower sputter as it came closer and closer. And then it sort of turned and I could hear it coming down. You know, you hear the change in tone as it's clearly falling and moving at speed away from you, and then an almighty explosion as it hit a building about half a kilometer from where I was. Now, that is something Europeans need to start empathizing with, or these things are going to be falling on their heads, their cities, their homes, their communities. That's all I have to say there. This is coming.
I mean, you said it, that unless it affects someone personally, they generally don't get it. And that's not unique to America, to Europe, to Russia, to Africa, or anywhere. It's unique to humanity. Usually, and I see this a lot, unless something affects them or possibly their immediate family, they really don't care. They literally don't care. If they could buy what they want in terms of food, cars, vacations, and so forth, they're fine. They'll elect anybody. They'll elect Hitler or even Trump. Think of that. And they don't care. They really don't care, especially if they promise to keep things the way they are, if a person is in a good place, or to make them better, lie to them and tell them what they want to hear. Why? I hate to say this, and people are going to comment about it, but most people are pretty dim. Most people are not that swift. I mean, it's really only, 5 to 10% of the people who really advance any civilizations. The rest just get along to go along, or go along to get along, however you want to say it. They really don't care. And they don't listen to the news. And this was way before the advent of fake news and all that. They just don't care. They go along their daily lives, and unless they're affected by it personally, they don't care. They especially don't like politics and all of that sort of thing. And I think it's even worse now with social media. They get the wrong information, so they really don't read any news or care about politics. And it's easier for a Putin and a KGB or an FSB and all that to convince people of lies. People just aren't following the truth anymore, but they never did. And I think with social media, and I've written about
this. But David,
this,
even there's...
But I have to say this one last thing. It's
even those who are engaged with,
and after social media, it's all over. It's a disgrace.
Yep. Even those, and I interact a lot with people who do follow the news, and I think there's a higher consumption of what I call more traditional news here, and we still have a state broadcaster for all of their faults and weaknesses. They still produce relatively high output of the news, but it's literally, you know, what happened. This happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. It doesn't all get put together in a strategic way. So even people who are relatively well informed about what I would call current events, it doesn't give them the strategic perspective of what's going on. And unless you've studied Russia, it's almost impossible to imagine how base and how toxic human societies can become. It's, unless you've seen it directly and experienced it and spoken to people who've gone through it, it's practically impossible to imagine that. And this is even people who do have, I would say, a normal amount of human empathy for their communities and those who are in front of them, their families. It's a very, very difficult thing to communicate. But unfortunately, it's coming. It is coming. And if we let Russia expand and export its non-values, its nihilism, its parasitism, the theft and humiliation that is core to its power vertical, if they're allowed to impose that system on more and more societies, then I'm afraid poverty, extraordinary poverty and grimness is what is going to await. And quite apart from, the language in the NSS, Europe is, by and large, a relatively peaceful place with dramatically lower crime rates than almost any other place in the US. And despite myriad problems, and people sort of focusing on the sort of, the little bit of a city that's sort of dirty or scary, you'll find that the majority of people don't live like that. They live relatively normal lives in extremely affluent societies, and they read books and they go to see movies and they watch plays. This idea of civilizational collapse is a narrative that is spun by grifters and disingenuous criminals so that they can gain more power and pool the wealth into their hands. It's as simple as that.
I agree with everything you're saying.
Well, I'll give you the last word, and then probably my hand's going to go to sleep, so we'll probably have to wrap it up in a minute.
I just wanted to say that I agree with everything you said about Russia and the fact that somebody would have to be, study Russia as long as you have, actually, to kind of know and understand the history and the what's hard baked into the Russian civilization and culture. But I will say this: you don't have to be a PhD in Russian history to just read the news and look at the photos and videos of what they're doing to Ukraine. I mean, I'm sorry, you don't. Just read any of the millions
to each other
words that have been written
to each other, David. I mean, they abuse their own soldiers. They abuse their own soldiers. They murder their own soldiers. They're treating Ukrainians in the way they treat each other, and the way they would treat us is no different.
No, but I guess, I understand that. So I'm saying, even if you don't read the news and you don't get the analytical piece that most news organizations should give, but don't, putting together the dots, just read some of the stories or look at some of the videos and photos of what the Russians are doing to Ukraine. And if you still don't care about what they're doing or the future for Europe or for your country, then that's your fault. And I think it is their fault. And most people are so, I guess, tired of hearing about this or being deluged with information on the internet and social media. They just do this. And it's not that they can't understand videos of children getting killed and schools and nurseries and libraries being blown up. They get it. They just ignore it. But I'll say this as the final word: ignore it at your own peril, because it's coming to a city and village near you very, very soon.
That's a good place to end, David. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're going to
Thanks for being
this topic, as you know,
thanks for being
upset.
A comrade.
Yeah, well, stay warm.
Thanks for being a comrade in this fight. Yeah.
I agree. And folks, thank you for watching again. We're going to we're going to do this every Wednesday, and we're also going to be adding some more live streams with some ongoing and repeat guests. So stay tuned. Thank you all very much. Jonathan, stay warm and get inside.
Yes, I'm going to go and have a drink now. And just to prove to all our American watchers that Christmas isn't banned here, is a lovely Christmas tree. There we go.
And they're not killing all the Christians. Excellent. Thank you for that.
And some people will recognize the. I think this was in Love Actually or something. This particular church. But anyway, I'm sure in the comments people can guess where it is I'm standing here. But that's
Thank you, Jonathan.
That's it for today.
Yeah. Cheers.
Brilliant stuff.